Hey, it's Coach Taylor here from SmarterTeamTraining.com. I've been doing a real good job this summer of actually getting a chance to read a lot of books on my travels and getting a chance to have a little bit of downtime, making time for myself to just improve as a professional and really try to go back to the roots, start reading some books, checking out podcasts and videos and that type of thing. And I stumbled upon a book from Human Kinetics that the author's name is Daniel Taylor, and he's actually we've actually had many conversations going back to when we were working in the college sector, or when I was working in the college sector, and it was cool to actually get a chance to see him put a book together and to get a chance to read what's worked for him and hear a little bit about what he knows now, kind of thing, in comparison to what we were talking about way back in the day. So I actually sent him an email, and he said he was game for getting on the radio show. And so, it's cool to reach out to people that are just willing to just share their experiences and really just to answer some questions about sometimes pretty simple things in their mind, but might be a little more complicated on how we're interpreting it or how we're trying to implement it into our programs. Daniel, man, I appreciate you getting on the phone here. I know it's late on a Monday night, but it's cool to making time to get back to the field, man. I'm looking forward to a great conversation here.
Yeah, Rob, I appreciate it. Thank you for the offer. It is nice to kind of reconnect a little bit because we did talk quite a bit, actually, when I first started doing this. So it's nice to kind of jump back and chat with you and go over some of this stuff. So thank you for inviting me.
Daniel, man, I can Google anybody nowadays and check out someone's bio and find out what they did in 1992, as I've said several times on this radio show. But I want to know a little bit more about you as a person, to be honest with you. I mean, where did your passion for the field come from? I mean, how did you really kind of get going into, being involved with strength conditioning at a college level? Were you a college athlete that led on to something? Was there a mentor of yours that kind of gave you some ammunition to really get going? Or can you really just walk me through that process about how you got to where you are now?
It's actually a combination of both, really. I was fortunate enough. I'm from England originally, and in England, no real strength and conditioning background, but I love basketball, and I played basketball, and I was fortunate enough to come over here, which is every, in my case, Englishman's basketball-playing Englishman's dream to come over to the States and play collegiate basketball and try and go on. So I was fortunate enough to come over here, and I ended up in my last 2 years playing Division II basketball at Franklin Pierce College, which was a very good experience, and I learned a great deal about myself and the game and all those wonderful things. But one thing that was really apparent to me, particularly those last 2 years, was we didn't have a true strength and conditioning coach, and we didn't really have anybody overseeing it. So it was a group of upperclassmen, including myself, that really kind of got involved with it. And, looking back, we just did classic bodybuilding splits and, just kind of threw weights around and had a great time. And, like a lot of the things that we do, it transferred to the floor, and I felt stronger, and I played better in practice. I had more confidence, and, all those wonderful things. So as it went along and I moved from my junior to my senior year, the freshmen that came in, we were kind of given them, so to speak, we the seniors, to oversee and to kind of work with them, and in a weight room this would be, work with them and work them out. And, so it was, the first part was me experiencing it and me feeling it and the joy and the success that it translated onto the court. And then the second piece was more then using my rudimentary knowledge and passing on to these younger guys and, kind of seeing it through them. The second thing that happened was in the summer between my junior and senior year, I was working out at the College of St. Rose in Albany, which is kind of where my home base was, and I was just working out in their facility, and the fitness coordinator and strength coach there is a really good friend of mine. His name's Anthony Barker, and we, again, just, working out, no big deal, and he said, you're really good with people, and I said, well, I appreciate that. And he said, you should think about personal training if you don't choose to play professionally in Europe. And I'd never even contemplated it. I just, was helping kind of the freshmen out the following fall just because, I'm part of the same team, and I never really contemplated that as even a career choice. And so the kind of him saying that, and I was discussing it a little bit, really stuck with me. And then I graduated, had a good time at Franklin Pierce and graduated. Didn't really have the offers to play in Europe that I would have wanted. And again, it kind of flashed up, and I'm like, I do like helping people, and I do enjoy this as a lifestyle. And then I made my foray into the fitness industry initially, working at a Gold's Gym, and the rest is kind of history. Really. So it was a combination of probably like everybody that's listened to this, just, doing it for myself, and then through doing it for myself, helping others and kind of, paying it forward, so to speak.
After reading your book called Conditioning to the Core, and I personally have said it several times on the show and spoke about it on several episodes and even presenting around the place, around the country or the world for that matter, I hate the term core as it relates to anything anatomical. So anytime we had that type of conversation, I always want to have it defined for me. So how do you define the core, and what things should I be considering when training the core?
Yeah, I have some very good friends who are of the same opinion of you when it comes to the word core, and I do understand it, and I think it was important to put it in the book, almost I guess in that regard too. So people are kind of like, oh, so here we go again. Here's another core book, or here's another core concept, or here's the word core again. And I think one of the things that we wanted to do was to take what is a buzzword and kind of get it back to really what is it all about. So the definition that we chose to use within the book is basically everything except for the head, arms, and legs. So it gets away from just abs, and it gets away from abs and lower back, and it really is kind of that central anchor to the body, which is going to allow for force transfer and a multitude of things that the book goes into. And really is kind of the mainstay of all that, because the head is the brain is the center of everything, as you know, and the arms and legs provide a lot of the movement and the gross movements that we see and that we use. But what's in the middle, to me, is the most important part, which underlays everything we've ever done at Siena, and my co-author, Greg, is very, very big on it and spent many, many years in the NBA. And of all the different things that he did with these very high-level athletes, the core was always fundamentally part of what he did. So again, it would really be, everything you can think of, which includes the neck in some regards, torso and glutes and hip complex.
I had a couple conversations with people leading up to this interview, and I posted a couple things on social media. And one big thing that people really wanted to ask you about were the concept of utilizing chops, that diagonal movement pattern, if you want to call it that, with your arms going from upper left-hand side to bottom right-hand side type scenario. I mean, how are you utilizing chops with machines, cables, bands, et cetera, to train that core part of the body?
We do use them. They are in the book. I like them a lot. I do think, things moving along the PNF lines are important. I think those kind of rotational movements that happen around the mainstay of the core, as I just defined it a moment ago, are athletic movements. They're our life movements. They're like me reaching down with my hand to my opposite side to make sure that my daughter's not running off down the hallway. Everything, from golf swings right through. So I do think that they're very functional, to use another buzzword. I do think they're very, very important. The way that I utilize them, and I do in every way that you've described, typically we do them with cable sections, just because in the environment I utilize here at college, it's just an easier way of doing it. But, bands are excellent. So, there's a couple of the TRX type equipment. I think they're called the Rippers that you can do it with. It's slightly different style. But they're really, really good. I think for me, and this is sort of fundamental in the whole concept of how I train the core and what is laid out in the book, is when you are focusing on the core, you want the core itself to be strong and you want it to be rigid, but you want the movements around it to be very fluid and very smooth. So the good thing about the chopping and lifting patterns is that, the torso, the glutes, and everything that encompasses the core is in that very strong, athletic position. And you're teaching the body to maintain that whilst making movement around it, which I think is the most important thing. The way that I tend to do it is to start with floor-based activity. So we do the different kneeling, so half kneeling, one knee up, one knee down, tall kneeling, and then we progress that from the floor to standing with 2 feet bilaterally. Then we'll go into a split stance, which is kind of like just a very basic staggered stance, and then we'll end with a more dynamic position, which would just be an isometric lunge stance, and still making a chopping movement around it. Often using things like the functional movement screen, you're going to find which ones of those chopping motions would perhaps be more specific to your client or to your athlete. But in the more general sense, when we're just kind of programming for large groups of people, like I said, we normally start with the split stance on the floor. So again, half kneeling, one knee up, one knee down, move into tall kneeling, which is slightly more challenging because that 1 foot up has a bit of an anchor to it, and then just kind of go from the floor to standing, and then from standing into a very athletic position, which in this case we choose to do the like an isometric lunge position.
I have to be honest, when I looked through the table of contents here in the book, even before purchasing it and getting it here to read, one of the things I generally see when people are talking about this ab-low back type complex and designing their program, they're talking about flexion, extension, some type of rotation. And the one thing I thought that really jumped out to me was the part that you brought up was anti-flexion, anti-extension, and a little bit even about the anti-rotation. And then, to be honest with you, that's really what sold me on the book, to be very, very fair with you. And so I was really kind of curious about how you went about approaching that or incorporating that into your program kind of scenario. My question to you obviously is, typically flexion and extension and rotation make up, the majority of core programs, but how much does the anti of each impact your program?
Almost completely, to be, completely honest in terms of, how I choose to do things. The fitness and strength and conditioning industry is an interesting one in as much as new ideas will come out through research or through, experience and practice. New equipment will come out, and people go very far to one way. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened. It's the greatest piece of equipment you've ever heard of. It's the most compelling piece of evidence for whatever I'm choosing to talk about. And then there's that's kind of the mainstay, and then there's the inevitable backlash, and a few years later this is the worst thing you could do, and this is the worst piece of equipment. And I find that what the truth of the matter usually is somewhere in the middle. Now the reason I say that is, first of all, it's how I feel about our industry in general. But the other part of it is, crunches and flexion and rotation and Russian twists have been around forever. And then a lot of research, particularly from Stuart McGill, has come out to talk about, why flexion is bad for the disc and the lumbar spine particularly, why flexion with rotation is bad in the same regard. And so everybody jumped on that bandwagon and was like, these are terrible things. So we're gonna vilify them, and we're never gonna do them again. And then in more recent years, we're kind of coming back to, well, is it really that bad? So to kind of get to the point of your question, I was part of the wave of people that read the stuff, and anytime a brilliant researcher tells me that he believes through his specific focused research that the discs can be at risk for being in certain positions, I'm going to listen. And if I don't listen, I think that's foolish. And I think that if I go one way too far the other way, yes, this is a perfect scenario, or no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, then I'm foolish. So I listen to it. I agree with it. I think that if he's telling me it could put people at risk, then perhaps I should rethink what I'm doing. At the same time, more than likely because of people vilifying the flexion and extension and so on, a lot of the anti-movement started to come out. So I started playing around with them. This is going back probably 8 or 9 years now. And I really found that you take away the research and take away what I just said about potential issues in the lumbar spine, and to me it's more about, the anti-stuff is more about how athletes are. I don't really want their core, again, as I defined it, to rotate. I don't really want their core to flex. I want it to be stiff in an athletic sense. I want it to be able to transfer force efficiently, which is going to require it to be rigid. I want a lot of movement in the hip, joint. I want it to have, strength and power through the legs. But again, I want it to transfer through a rigid core. I don't want to worry about flexion. I want to worry about anti-flexion. I don't want to worry about my core getting hit for a layup and my body spinning to the side. I want to resist that rotational force. So I found that not only did it kind of, buy into some of the research that I was reading and that I did like and I agreed with, but it also, to me, when I watched athletes do things, well, that's what I'm seeing. One good example I think we cited in the book particularly was to do with sprinters. And I like talking about what we do in regards to track and field, because track and field is about absolute speed, absolute height, and so on. So there's not as much like cut and change direction, and the rules are quite straightforward. So if you watch a sprinter run towards you, you watch the Olympics or any of the stuff that's going on, you can actively see rotation being resisted, because if there's too much rotation, they're not going to be very fast sprinters, and they'll lose or they'll get injured, unfortunately. So you can see the resistance happening, and that to me was like, well, then that's what I need to train. So that's really kind of what got me on the track of that. We do it, religiously. We do it. Our core training we do every single day that I have them, which is anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 times a week. Doesn't matter what time of season it is. From NCAA tournaments to preseason in a couple of weeks. But again, it really is heavy on the flexion, anti-flexion, anti-rotation. So I would say it's really the mainstay of what we do.
The more and more you look into the core program at locations or clinics and that type of thing, sometimes they turn into almost like a trickery. And I don't mean that to be rude to any the products or programs or anything out there, but I really kind of feel like it tries to get overly advanced and complicated. And my question, even personally, getting ready for this interview, was wanted to kind of hear your opinion about balance type devices and balance training and incorporating that into a core type program. I mean, do you feel that there is a need to be on a balance type device, or are there other ways to improve this area of the body?
My gut answer, and kind of like I guess the blanket statement I'll make, is no. I think that most of the research that I've read and people that I look up to and that I look to for answers would say the same thing. And if you have an injury, whether you're a high-level athlete or you're returning, to some kind of fitness routine, yes, then, you do need to work in, and there's been, a break in the chain from, ankle or knee to brain that, needs to be found. The proprioception through that is important. So, yeah, I think in those instances and, physical therapy and physiotherapy-based reasons, yes. I think in general, though, if you're looking for balanced training, that's kind of a different thing. You know what I mean? It's almost like, everyone's seen YouTube videos of people doing crazy things on stability bowls and, crazy balancing acts. And to me, it's like, well, now you've gone past training in the sense that we're talking about, and now you're practicing a skill in almost like a Cirque du Soleil or a gymnastics type of thing. And that's not training. That's its own event. I think if you want to elicit the response that people assume they would get from a Bosu bowl standing on it or doing squats in a stability bowl, take your shoes off. There's a lot of research, good and bad and indifferent, about barefoot training, but you're going to get a lot of feedback from just standing on one foot. So let's get good on one foot before we start trying to do crazy things, jumping on and off balls. And then, in terms of working with athletes, there's a lot of information, which, again, I completely believe about how, the thing about the balanced training in the way that we're talking about is it's slowing the body down because the body's having to try and, get used to the surface it's on, and everything's slowing down and the amortization phase is slowing down. And really, I don't want my athletes to slow down. I want them to explode. And then the final point is, if we're looking for specificity of training, we train and we play on hard surfaces almost across the board. So I think that, if we're looking for the principle of specificity, which is one of the principal things that we should be in our jobs, then no. It's not specific to anything that I do. Could it be a good warm-up? Maybe. I've got other ways I'd like to warm up. But in terms of using it for core training or for stability training, I would much rather do barefoot stuff, or I would, put you in really tight split stances, which would be, to me, more athletic and, would help with corrective exercises even, than put you on those devices for that reason. Even the sports like surfing or sports that inherently appear to be unstable because you're basically on water. One of the things about surfing is to become a good surfer, forget being an elite surfer, is you have to learn to stabilize the board. So when you can surf and you become a good surfer and you become a very good surfer and you become, hopefully in this case an elite surfer, well, you've created stability through the board. So now, that's the essence of standing up on the wave. So once you have that, well, then now you need to have trained in a stable environment to learn to use the forces that you're trying to gain from having created stability. So I even think in the instances where people work with sports like surfing, and their inclination is to go, well, it's unstable, it's water. I even think in those cases it can be overplayed a little bit too, because they're actually creating a stable environment. Therefore, we need to train them in a stable environment so they can get the most out of it. So, in direct answer to your question, I would say no. I think there's enough reasons not to, and I think you can get it in a million other ways. But again, if there's a physical therapy, a physiotherapy, or a post-surgical need to, well, then absolutely they become a very, very important modality.
You're talking a lot about the kinetic chain and how that relates to the cranium or the head, the arms, the legs, and then my brain kind of go into that whole concept of that injury reduction, or some people sell it as an injury prevention type program. Are you using this core training type program or type approach as part of an emphasis or even a part of a program as a whole when developing injury reduction programs?
Yes. I think, and I'm sure you would attest to this too, for how you choose to train people, that, I want my programs and my athletes to be as injury-free as possible. Therefore, the style of exercise that I choose, the time of year that we pick things, how we phase the training will all be about hopefully preventing, I guess I shouldn't say preventing, reducing injury. Preventing is unfortunately something that we really can't do, but trying to reduce that injury rate. So yes, but I wouldn't say that I do it specifically for, this is our, for example, ACL injury prevention program. This is just our program. But what I want to have in it is some very well thought out, very thorough things that will not only help make you bigger, faster, stronger, but they will also help reduce injuries. And some of that's going to come down to, taking a look at the athlete, trying to find some testing that's going to allow me to find, what their weak spots are, any asymmetries they may have. injury history, and all that good stuff, and then hopefully sculpting my core programming and my corrective programming around that. So in essence, yes, it definitely is for helping with reducing of injuries, but that's not the only reason. It's kind of for the kind of overall program itself is hopefully going to encompass everything. Because the way that I look at my philosophy personally, and this is something that people ask me from time to time, as I'm sure they do you and the people listening, and I've thought about it a lot over the years. I'm like, what is my philosophy particularly? And really, it's just two things. I want to reduce injuries as much as is realistically possible. Given that sports are a wonderful thing, but injuries are unfortunately part of it. And the other side of it is I want to chase and enhance athleticism. However athletic you may be, we're going to try and make you more athletic. If you're not the most athletic person in the room, well, then we're going to do as many things as we can to kind of raise whatever you're bringing to the table. And so how we get to those two things, I'm open to everything. I'm definitely not a strength coach, and I never have been, and I doubt I ever will be, that will just be like, I'm an Olympic lifting guy, or I'm a kettlebell guy, or, we do strongman stuff and nothing but. I think that everything has its place. I think that if we're chasing those two goals, which, hopefully will, and here, at least at Siena, we have won quite a number of championships based off those two goals, then yeah, everything that we do will be hopefully reducing injury and at the same time enhancing the athletic profile.
I enjoy going and watching coaches coach and actually getting a chance to just observe, to be very honest and fair with everybody. I enjoy just bringing a pen and paper and getting a chance to write down notes and that type of thing. And if I got a chance to come in the weight room and see you actually work, I mean, how are you implementing a vertical core program? Are you doing core training just on your back type scenario with a bunch of exercises laying down, doing that traditional crunch type of scenario? Are you using sport appropriate selections for different people? I mean, can you walk me through a little bit of that? What would I see if I came and saw you do a core type training workout?
We really don't do a ton of like laying on your back. Again, general, typical type core stuff. Some of the stuff that you would do on your back, may have come through correctives that have either been screened through functional movement screen, or maybe one of our medical team here have screened out something. And dead bug, style movements would be one I can think off the top of my head. But generally speaking, and this leads into what you were saying about training the vertical core. The plan is really going to be to start on the floor and get off the floor. Now, it doesn't always smoothly go as well as that, but the whole process of core training, goes back to the whole primitive and fundamental movement patterns, which have become an interesting point that has been discussed a lot in the last few years about how when you're a baby, you start on your back, you roll over, and then you can start to crawl. Crawl becomes a crawling on all fours becomes pulling yourself upright. Pulling yourself upright becomes standing becomes toddling around, and then you start breaking into these kind of funky-looking runs. So, I mean, that's really how we develop, and that's also how I think, if you've really become detrained or it's an area that you haven't focused on, well, just start there. I mean, it's how our body is innately programmed. So I think you should start on the floor, but, to your point, you end up standing. So the way that we do things, again, the categories that we fill in every single time we do core training are anti-extension exercises, anti-rotary exercises, something for the scapular-thoracic musculature, which is all, the upper mid-back, very postural type activities, and then something for the lumbo-pelvic hip complex. I like the idea more of it being global areas as opposed to specific muscles. So, again, we don't do crunches, take out the spine stuff, and just in general, I think, whether or not a crunch will make you look more aesthetically pleasing. Pulling my rib cage to my hips, I don't think is going to really benefit me, particularly when I have short time and a busy college schedule, as opposed to these large global movements, which is what you and I are talking about. So we pick one of each of those categories, and we do it as a circuit. The thing which we try to break down in the book is to try and put exercises in these categories. And, what is generally true is that they all end up kind of fitting in everything, because there's a lot of, like, anti-rotary components in a single-leg plank, for example, but its mainstay is to stop your hips dropping to the floor, which is anti-extension. So we try and separate them as much as possible. So we pick, again, as anti-extension, anti-rotary, scapular-thoracic musculature, and then something lumbo-pelvic hip. Do it as a circuit 3 to 4 times. And then, just to give you an overview of kind of how we do it, we may start with a stability ball plank as our basic anti-extension movement. after a while, its body weight, maybe we'll do it into a what I call rock the cradle, which is simply just extending through your shoulder joint back and forth in a rolling out kind of capacity. After a few months, provided the person that's doing this is showing proficiency, I want to load it a little bit. So we'll do what I call a vertical rollout, which has a couple of different names, which is basically kneeling in front of a cable stack and grabbing the rope behind you. And it looks a lot like the beginning of one of those rope cable crunches where people just kind of roll themselves down. But then all I do is keep the arms as straight as possible, so locked elbows, and just move through the shoulder joint and pull that rope down so it comes right past my head by my ear. And I have my arms out straight and then let it pull my arms straight back up to a point when I can feel it wanting to arch my back. Before I feel the feeling in my back, though, I can feel the abdominals at the front and that kind of deep, anterior core muscles stopping me from arching my back, and then I pull it down to the opposite side of my head. So it's a rolling out motion. It's an anti-extension motion, but now I've gone from, being in a prone position on a stability ball to being in a kneeling, heading to an upright position using an external load. And then we'll just kind of eventually get you standing upwards doing it. Obviously, if it's a 6'10", 7-foot athlete, we struggle a little bit. But the idea, again, like you said at the beginning, is start on the floor, make the floor more challenging, then move to something that's sort of on the floor, maybe half on, half off, like a stability ball or a half kneeling position, depending on what you're doing, and then go from that position to what to me would be the logical next step, which would be, kneeling to standing or standing to a split position. And then hopefully if you run the whole gamut, you end up in these more dynamic, more athletic positions. And to me, that will then transfer to the field of play in a really strong way, because not only are we training your quote-unquote core in the weight room, but now we're putting you in positions that will directly relate to what you do on the floor. And then when you can tie that in, you usually get a really good result out of it.
When I get a chance to sit down in a consulting sense and get a chance to talk about the core as a complex within the body, not rolling out the head, the arms, and the legs type scenario, if we're going to go with that definition, two things I really like to ask questions about, and if you don't mind going down this road here a little bit, I'd appreciate it. I really like asking about how breathing impacts the core program or the exercise selection, and how they're actually implementing some type of breathing education and that type of scenario into their program. And the other thing is how they're implementing some type of carrying program that sometimes unilateral loading or farmer's walk type approach. I mean, do you use either one of those types of components into your program?
I'll answer that quite simply. We do both. I would like to do more breathing. I find that it's hugely important. It's an area that's definitely being explored more now, I think, than in years before. Although saying that, in the yoga culture and, some of the cultures more like that, Pilates, it's one of those things that's always been present. I think when you move to more of the more typical, like, strength-based activities, I think maybe we lost it for a little bit. But I think that it's such a powerful tool that it really is starting to come back. The focus on core training in its many different varieties is huge, and it does pay massive dividends if you focus on an area. And it's sort of like logical that this would come full circle. The diaphragm itself, is part of those deep intrinsic core muscles. It definitely is part of it. Dysfunctional breathing is ubiquitous around the world and in all the athletes in my weight room. And if you don't breathe well, everything else is going to kind of fall from that point. When we do conditioning, particularly, which is usually where it shows up, because people are obviously more aware of their breathing or lack of it when they're running sprints. And I always tell them, I'm like, he or she who controls their breath controls their destiny, which is, a line that makes them kind of laugh, but it's true. So I think it's very, very important. How I tend to utilize it is if we're in a slightly smaller group or it's more of a controlled setting, particularly when we are doing either corrective exercises or some of the core exercises that aren't too dramatic, where they already have a lot going on, like I'm in a deep lunge with a medicine ball over my head. Really kind of try and focus on that. I think the best line I heard, and I unfortunately forget who told me this, was, the brace of the abdominals is important. You want to feel like you're getting punched in the abdomen and that kind of like tight bracing sensation. That's important. That's kind of what, you want to activate those muscles and you want to engage them by creating a brace. But you need to breathe over the brace. So if you're doing a brace or you're doing some kind of tightening motion and you still can't breathe and you're struggling to get the air in and out, you're kind of failing. The point is to be able to control that brace or that tightening movement and then breathe comfortably throughout. Because we're dealing with a lot of different people, who come from all different backgrounds and, may or may not have asthmatic issues and all kinds of other things. I think when it comes to training the breathing, it's good to isolate it if you can and kind of start at the beginning. So it's all well and good, me telling, my basketball players and my lacrosse guys, okay, this is how I want you to breathe on your bench press. But, it's such a large motion that they almost, even with the best coaching and the best intentions, they're probably going to let that area slip of all the things that they're going to focus on during a bench press. So I think, and we're also on very short time restraints, so you're going to have to try and find where to put it in your programming, which is obviously the challenge for all of us. What I've found, though, again, is with the conditioning sessions, because people are aware of their breath and they're aware of the rise and fall of their rib cage and, being out of breath, whatever it might be, that's a very good time to do it because, you're taking your timed rest break. And, I go over to them, put my hands on their diaphragm, and I have decent-sized hands, so I can put my hands on their rib cage too. And I want them to breathe into my hands and understand how that feels and then have them put their hand there. So that way I'm also getting away from, get your hands off your knees, don't put your hands over your head. This is where I want you to put your hands because I want you to feel, I want you to feel your lungs expanding. I want you to feel both of your lungs expanding, and I want you to feel expanding your rib cage and not just the high point below your throat rising and falling. So I found that conditioning is a really good way to start to teach them how to do it. Because the idea is going to be, I want you to breathe properly. I want you to breathe appropriately. But I don't want you to just do it sitting in a chair or, lying on the floor. I want you to be able to do it when you can run up and down the court. I want you to be able to do it when you're in the middle of a squat. But you need to do it in sort of like non-dynamic, simple ways first, like everything that we do. It's got to start somewhere, and then slowly teach them how to do it by the time they are doing these explosive dynamic motions. So I usually would do it, like I said, in kind of in and around the timed rest breaks of conditioning. And then I always take 3 to 5 minutes at the end of the conditioning, usually before we stretch statically as a cool down, or if need be, afterwards, depending on what the coaches require, who's going to run off the class, and literally have them lie on the floor. Just have them lie on the floor, have them put their hands on their abdomen. I even one time brought out little 2.5-pound plates and I put it on their abdomen so they could breathe into something to kind of really get that going. And just let them listen to their breath, let them understand what I'm looking for, and get the body to learn to do it in a very, very simple and relaxing way. The other benefit of doing it that way is it's also going to kind of kickstart the recovery response, which I'm going to want anyway, because the next day they're going to come back into practice, into conditioning, into lifting. So the more of that, the better. It gets a bit tricky to do that in season, as you're obviously aware, because it gets kind of busy. But if I can hammer it in preseason, if I can hammer it in the summertime, if I can make them aware of it and make them find that it's important, which you absolutely will do, because athletes are all over the place, and they have, particularly at the Division I level, they have so many different people asking them to do things in class and parents calling. So just taking 3 minutes, no one can disturb you. All I want you to do is breathe. And they really do kind of get into it. So that's usually how I put it into the workouts. And then once they've learned how to do it in terms of the correct expansion and what I want them to feel, then in the lower grade movements, the correctives, and in the more simple core exercises, I can go, okay, remember how you breathe on the floor? You remember how you felt that into your rib cage? Okay, while you're doing this particular exercise, I want you to not only make the movement we've talked about, keep your body in this position, I want you to do it whilst breathing in the way we talked about on Tuesday during the conditioning session. So that's usually how I do it. And, I think it's an area that I'm going to try and expand on. I think our industry is going to expand on, and I do think it's going to be elicit some very interesting responses along the way. To jump to your second point, in terms of the strongman carries, yes, we do them. I think that they are underutilized, and I think that people should absolutely find some way of using them and put them into everything they do. I use them in our core section more often than not because I find that it fits. We do farmers walks bilateral. We do waiters walks bilateral, just 2 weights over the head, usually kettlebells. We've done dumbbells too. Unilateral, I think, is fantastic. I think if the one thing that you're going to take from this whole interview is to do a one-handed farmer's walk up and down the hallway as part of the end of your core workout, then you're probably doing well. I think, moving from that in terms of progressing, I think what we tend to do is do farmer's walk and waiter's walk. We'll do farmer's walk, waiter's walk unilaterally. And then we'll do what Dan John calls a crosswalk, which is essentially the same thing, only you're going to have one arm in a waiter's walk position over your head and one arm in a farmer's walk position, and the opposite side, walk your distance, change hands, walk back. Great exercise, a way of challenging kind of both ends of that spectrum. The heavy carry series also, to me, would include Turkish get-ups and half get-ups. they've been expounded upon immensely, and I won't go down that road because there's a lot to talk about, but I think that's a great movement that you can add in. I would consider that for me to be a total core movement. So if you're short on time and you're like, well, Coach Taylor likes the idea of this anti-extension, anti-rotary, scapulothoracic, and lumbo-pelvic hip complex, I just don't have time to do all that. We've got a short window. Teach them Turkish get-ups. Learn how to do them. Teach them how to do them. And again, you'll be on the right path. So yes, I do think they're important to do. We do it. We do the weighted stuff, and we go fairly heavy as much as we can, particularly in the summertime and the pre- and post-season. In season, we still do them. We just kind of reduce the loading and intensity a little bit. Sometimes I've done them as like a finisher. So we load the logs up for the heavy farmer's walk, get through the whole lift, up and back. It's a great grip strength exercise of the finisher. So we utilize them a lot, and I do encourage everyone listening to at least experiment with them and try and find where it would fit within your program.
I know you're getting a big-time opportunity to make an impact on a lot of players that you get a chance to work with live, and some coaches even, I'm sure, come down and sit down and have a fair amount of questions for you that and hopefully you're getting a chance to motivate individuals and hopefully help them inspire greatness in others, for that matter. I mean, is there one big motivational takeaway that you hope people get a chance to walk away from you when you get a chance to talk to them about just life in general or sports as a whole?
In general, for me, I think you need to love what you do, and I think I would express that to everybody. I think the strength and conditioning coaches find the love in what they do in different areas. I mean, some just like being in the weight room and moving the weight and seeing, numbers go up, which is fine. I think some people, like taking the 100-pound weak football guy that just made the team as a walk-on, and 4 years later he leaves and he's the strongest guy in the weight room, and he's gone to the field a few times, and those kind of things. For me, I think people would be more about my approach with people. I do think I'm a good strength coach. I think I'm better than I used to be. I intend to get a lot better by the end of my career. But I think that you need to engage people. I think, I want to take time for people. I don't just blow my whistle and yell and scream at these guys and girls. I want to get to know them as people. I want them to know why what we do is important. I think that's a big kind of lesson to take away. I always tell them you don't have to love this stuff. Because, male or female, they may not really like the weight room, but you need to understand, even if it's just a basic understanding, why it's important. Because I'm going to tell you why it's important, and then you're going to feel it and you're going to see it in how you play. And I think if you can teach them that, then that's going to last with them for a 4-year career, maybe a pro career, and hopefully a lifetime. And I think that's very, very important. And I think that is within the coaching. And I think sometimes people forget that coaching isn't just going to be move your hips in a certain way, put your feet and legs and arms in a certain position. You need to coach them and teach them and really kind of let them buy into it. Usually, when I talk to my interns or I talk to people that come in, I always tell them 3 basic things to take away. Of all the things that we talk about, all the things that I write down, we bounce ideas around. The first one I always tell them is it's all good. And what I mean by that is that we're exposed to, from the podcast I've listened to in the past from yourself and other places, education, lots of different ideas, lots of different concepts, wave loading, conjugate method, do you box squat, do you front squat, do you not squat? It's all good. It's all in the application of it, So find out what you like, find out what people you respect like, learn how to apply it in your scenario. So really, it's all good. There's specifics of certain things that I'm not a huge fan of. There's certain things that I can't do in my environment. But I would say, generally speaking, it's all good. The second thing I always tell them is keep growing. There's a lot of professionals I've met, and this is true in many fields, who they kind of reach what they would consider the top, or they get the job that they want, whatever it might be, and then they kind of like plateau themselves. This is an exciting industry. This is an exciting job. There's new stuff coming out every day. Experimenting, so to speak, with your athletes, changing a few things that you've done year to year. There's too much growth for you to just sit back and let it happen around you. Dive into it, just completely immerse yourself in it. And, I think that people will benefit and will grow a lot more. I mean, it's the whole adage of don't always be the smartest guy in the room. If you're the smartest guy in the room, go find a new room. If you're the strongest guy in the weight room, go find a new weight room. You have to keep bettering yourself because this industry and the jobs that we're in, they're just going to grow and you're going to be left behind. And I think that's sad. And there's some talented professionals out there that I feel need to really, dive back into it and kind of like tap back into the things that are happening around them. And the last one, and I've thought about this a lot, particularly in the last few years, is don't hate. there's a lot of hate in our, and again, this would be true of a lot of industries, but there's a lot of hate in our industry, and I don't really understand why. I don't like what he's doing, or this is really, really bad, and this is the only way to do it, and I believe in this researcher, and why are we hating? It makes no sense to me. We're working with people, we're working with young men and women, we're in a wonderful job, a wonderful occupation. We get to share ideas and share experiences, and I think if people would look to raise each other up and not push each other down, I think that they would get a lot further. So I've always tried to live my life that way, but in the last couple of years particularly, I've really just well, what do you think of this? It's great. This is some things that I think would be better, and these are things I take from it, but it's great. One thing that really hit home with me is I watched Martin Rooney at an NSCA conference a few years ago, and he was talking something of this point, and he put a picture of Richard Simmons up. So we all kind of giggled in the background, ha ha ha, the guy in the spandex looks kind of funny. And then he put like a line up next to it and said that this guy has helped some amount of hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And he's like, if you sit there and say, I would like to help that many people, then why are you making fun of this guy? Now, granted, his methods are kind of wacky, and he's kind of a kooky character, but what he's done is what we all hope to do. I wouldn't want to wear spandex and jump up and down and do that kind of stuff, but that's really what we all want to do. And I thought about that afterwards, and I'm like, he's right. We have way too much hate in this industry. So, again, of all the things that people should take away from this and the 3 points I've just laid out, let's start to cut that out, and I think we'll all be better for it.
Well, Daniel, I know you work in a very intense environment there that's very busy, so I have no idea where you found time to write the book, but I appreciate that you did, and I enjoyed the read. Again, the book was called Conditioning to the Core. If anybody gets a chance to read the book, and I'll speak on Daniel's behalf here, hopefully he does not mind, but get a chance to reach out to him, shoot an email, give him a phone call, do that type of thing. Connect with him and ask better questions to get better responses, which lead to better questions. And I guarantee you that Daniel will follow up and be more than willing and welcome to just have a conversation about training in general. It doesn't have to be just regarding the core of the whole or basketball players, that whole thing. But I know he's a good dude. I know he likes talking about training, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. So, Daniel, my next question, which makes it very easy for me, is, how do people go about getting a hold of you?
The best way to do it would probably be through my college email, which is D for Daniel, M for Mark, Taylor, Taylor, at Siena, 1N.edu, and it'll just come right to my work email, which I get on my phone and all that kind of stuff too. And like you just said, love to share ideas. I think it's what moves our industry forward and helps us all grow. So anybody that wants to reach out, please feel free to do it, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Well, Daniel, man, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day. Again, it's an honor and a privilege to have you involved with the project here. I thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to just answer a few questions that I had and get on the show, my man. I look forward to hearing big things coming from you in the future, and I look forward to reading some more of the books that you got coming ahead, my man.
Rob, really appreciate it. Thank you for letting me do this. I think you do a fantastic job, and the whole team and the whole podcast is a really wonderful thing. So, again, I really, really appreciate you, and it's great to catch up and talk again.